and nobody should doubt the issues that are stake that are on stake. And we also know that this is an issue which is the priority of all the member states of the European Union and also of the European institutions. So this is what we're going to do today. And we are, if we start with the students who will see to that this becomes a good interactive discussion. It is Liv Andersson from Chalmers University in Göteborg. It is Najjar from Stockholm Resilience Center at the Stockholm University. And it's Johansson at the Luleå University of Technology. And as I said, the idea, and I would say very much the background to today's seminar, is Ambassador Prince, who is the German ambassador to Sweden. And we will also have the Troika, as we call it. That means the representatives or the ambassadors of the countries which are going to be, will have the presidency of the European Union in the coming, what will it be, 12, 18 months. And that is Ambassador Martins from Portugal and Ambassador Skirt from Slovenia. And with those words of introduction, I would like to hand over the floor to Ambassador Prince. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Christian. And I'm glad to see enthusiasts of Europe who want to engage in the future of Europe with us today. I think it's really a long-term project. In our presidency now, we dealt with lots of problems, as you observed in the media. Recovery, of course, is very important. And a part of it is also environmental technology. And you are studying at universities, which is a cradle of some of the new technologies for the future and will shape it. And also, of course, digitalization and many other things I don't want to talk about now because our topic is the future of Europe. And as Christian already said, we are just starting the discussion again. After these difficult times at COVID-19, we will have to continue in the trio presidency with Portugal, with Slovenia, and then also afterwards with Sweden on board, with France and the Czech Republic. So maybe it's coming to an end with the French presidency, we don't know. But of course, we need the time to engage you. It's not top down, it's bottom up. And we would need your advice also how to do it, in which form of discussion you want to engage. We have had a lot of experience in Germany now with Greta Thunberg. There's even a new film shown in the first channel on her, with her. We had Fridays for Future engaging the young generation. And it had a long and lasting impact also on political decision making. So the power of the young is well recognized. And I want to stop here because we are listening to you. Thank you very much for taking the initiative and later also discussing with us what we should do in the future to shape this dialogue. Thank you. Now over to Annika.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Anna. I will moderate this little session. I also work at the European Commission's representation here in Sweden. And I think we have got a good introduction here, so I will not talk much longer. I will just mention the EU targets that I've set because they're also kind of leading the future. And we have they haven't really been set yet. They have been proposed and they are being debated right now in the decision-making organs, so the European Parliament and the Council. And that's the 2050 target, which is that EU should be climate neutral by 2050. And we have the 2030 target where the Commission just also proposed sharpening this target to at least 55 or minus 55% by 2030. Then. So those we also should keep a bit in mind when we discuss your visions for 2030. So I will just hand over first to Nadja, who wanted to start. So please, Nadja, give us your vision.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to share my screen and then I will get started. Okay, thank you a lot that I can be here and share my vision of the EU climate policy in 2030. Who am I? My name is Najjar. I was born and raised in Vienna, Austria. However, I'm also Swedish and German, so I would say I'm a European from Vienna. I did my bachelor studies in environmental and natural resource management in Vienna, and currently I'm doing my master studies at the Stockholm Resilience Center and writing my master thesis on a green and just recovery process in the C40 cities network. I'm also very active with Push Sweden, a youth climate organization, where we do youth climate advocacy at the UNFCCC level, but also the EU and Swedish national level. And so my presentation is inspired by research by the Stockholm Resilience Center, but also broad young voices, for example, from the Young Voices on Climate Justice report by Generation Climate Europe, but also an event that I organized with Push Sweden, which was a youth consultancy on the European Green Deal, where we learned about the European Green Deal, but also collected youth demands. So, when thinking of my vision for 2030, I quickly realized that I cannot think about 2030 without thinking what is happening today and without thinking about the next 10 years to come. So as we can see here, our emissions need to peak now and then be drastically reduced to be able to have a 1.5 degree climate target that is compatible with the Paris climate goals. So 2030 will be defined by the actions we take today. So that's why I will talk about some things we already need to rethink today and steps we need to take now to then be on a climate just and climate resilient path by 2030. So the first thing is that with this pandemics, I think we're starting to rethink how complex and how interconnected our planet is, and how deeply interconnected our personal health is to planetary health. As we can see that land use change and agricultural expansion and urbanization are causing some of the causes for emerging diseases, but also some of the causes for climate change. So how we need to think multiple crises together and also tackle climate change and biodiversity crisis at the same time. Also, we really need to acknowledge that the 1.5 degree target is crucial because there are planetary tipping points. And if we start to transgress them, it could lead to a domino effect and a cascading effect amongst those tipping points, which will have an irreversible effect on our planet and for our human well-being. What we learned in 2020 is that we cannot only set climate goals for far in the future, like 2050, but we have to start now. So that's why we need to set a 2030 climate target in line with science. And according to the UNEP emissions gap report, that is at least 65% of the greenhouse gas, absolute greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030. However, when thinking about equity and how rich industrialized nations need to go first, it needs to be more around 70%. Then on that way, we also need to start thinking about our consumption-based emissions and how they shape global climate change. And also we need to acknowledge that we are in a crisis and this is an emergency. So we need to reach climate neutrality even earlier, already by 2040. How do climate politics look like in 2030? So they are guided around protecting our carbon sinks and also the most vulnerable global ecological tipping points, like for example, the Amazonian rainforest, which we could do by having deforestation-free value chains, but also protecting, having nature protection and nature-based solutions that are good for biodiversity, but also climate action. Also in 2030, fossil fuel subsidies are phased out already by 2025. And we have also updated our coal phase-out plans as we see that to reach a 1.5 degree target, all countries need to phase out coal at latest by 2030. And we also focus on a just transition, as we see, firstly, as you can see in this picture, there are so many more jobs that can be created in a renewable and clean sector. but also that we need to help those workers in those regions to have a structural change. What we also started in 2020 is rethinking economics, like Amsterdam, who embraced the donut model to mend its post-coronavirus economy. So instead of thinking, how can we get back economic growth, we think, how can we design our economies around staying within the planetary boundaries, but building a strong social foundation. So our economy is this green donut in between, serving climate and environment and well-being. So in 2030, we have it as a planning tool. It's widely spread around towns, cities, states, and even EU-wide. And instead of focusing on GDP growth to measure societal progress, we are measuring well-being and happiness. Also, we're rethinking politics in a way to institutionalize the demands and voices of young and future generations. For example, through national and EU-wide youth councils. Elected EU youth delegates also put forward youth demands to a high level. Citizen assemblies, which started in Ireland and also now recently in France, a representative group of citizens can work together on climate solutions in a participatory way. Also, EU politics is more transparent and free from corporate influence. Where are we now? As I said, what we do today will shape our path to 2030. And I think actually the next month are crucial for that. So as I said, this is 2030 climate target, which will be decided by the European Council in December. And here it is crucial that it's more ambitious. It is more ambitious than minus 55%. Also, we have the climate law negotiations, which will shape our climate, how our climate politics will look like in the next 10 years. And we have the deadline 2020, where globally and the EU needs to be a climate leader and submit an ambitious NDC so that we will ramp out our climate pledges and go from climate pledges that will lead to a 3-degree warming world to a 1.5 world. There are also the common agriculture policy, which will decide how 1/3 of our budget will look like, if it's going to go into industrialized agriculture or climate protection and environmental protection in the COVID-19 recovery. But Liv and Moa will talk about that more. What is my main message for you? I think as for the EU presidency and also all member states, it's really important to now ramp up ambition for the 2030 climate target. So that is Paris compatible of at least 65%, if not more, if thinking about equity. So thank you a lot for your attention, and I'm happy to discuss further. And now Liv will also have her presentation.
Wow, thank you very much. It was a very impressive list of suggestions, that we should take on board to all of us. I forgot one thing before we started off, and that is that those of you listening and watching this via Facebook, you can also ask questions to the students or to the ambassadors and or to Christian via the chat function in the Facebook tool. So please, after this, we will also give you the possibilities to come in and ask questions. I think we take all three before we ask questions. So I will pass the floor now to Liv. Please, Liv.
Thank you very much. Please do let me know when you can see my screen.
Go ahead.
All right. So my name is Liv Andersson. I'm from the Swedish Laplands, but I'm currently based in London, UK. I got a dual degree in architecture and engineering, and I'm currently studying remotely towards a master's degree in industrial ecology at Chalmers University of Technology. I'm also working as a sustainability and building physics engineer at Bureau Happold, and as a member of our international research group C-Lab, I'm exploring emergent disruption in the built environment, with a particular focus on climate resilience. It's unfortunate that we can't all be in Stockholm today, but I guess it aligns quite well with my chosen topic on why the recovery funds invested by the EU following the COVID pandemic should all be targeting green investments. The COVID pandemic has turned our world upside down and provided substantial changes to our society in the matter of weeks. As a surprise to probably no one in this conversation, it's caused major disruption to our global economy, supply chains, working habits, and social structures. I want to kick this presentation off with a question. How many lives can be at risk before we enforce a lockdown? Remember this question. We'll talk a bit more about it later. So the pandemic has changed everything we thought of as normal, but it's also shown us how quickly we can rethink and adapt to fundamental changes in the way our society is built. With the need for urgent action as presented by Nadja, and with an economy that's currently built on excessive consumption, it's my hope and aspiration that we will use this recovery to think differently and not go back to the way our society was structured before. I'm honored by the invitation to take part in this conversation and to present my climate vision to the European Commission. The more the merrier, I thought, so I decided to invite a few colleagues for a brainstorming session. I asked them, what suggestions would you like to make to the EU Commission based on the challenges we're facing in our industry? And fair to say, they had a few ideas. Since I've only got about 5 minutes left, I decided to spend them focusing on how the recovery funds can address one of our most urgent climate issues: air pollution. Greenhouse gases and air pollutions are closely interlinked, but they act in slightly different ways. An overly simplified explanation could be that greenhouse gases are what's mainly contributing to global warming, whereas air pollution can have severe effects on our environment and health. Through Vera Happel's research in C40 cities, we've been looking at the sources and effects of air pollution on cities across the world. I thought this would make for quite a nice comparison with some statistics from the pandemic. As of the 10th of November, almost 300,000 deaths actually in the EU were attributed to COVID-19. These are indeed worrying statistics, and I'm glad to see nations taking serious action to prevent further mortalities. Meanwhile, for the same geographical area, it's estimated that air pollution contributes to about 403,000 premature deaths every year. So relating back to my question at the start, if you think a lockdown is the right response to a pandemic, why have we not enforced one as a response to air pollution? So how have these issues been addressed? EU recently invested 1.82 trillion euros towards a 7-year COVID-19 recovery package. For ease, I've divided this by 7 to show an estimated annual figure. And as a comparison, the expenditure on environmental protection, including addressing air pollution, amounted to 269 billion euros in 2019. You can see an arrow pointing at the bar right there, and I also added some diagrams showing the relationship between them. So with all these figures in mind, is there anyone here who can motivate why investments made to restart the economy should not also be made with the precondition of environmentally friendly solutions in line with the Paris Agreement? As a built environment professional, I'm aware that my sector has a huge role to play in transitioning to a thriving economy. By accelerating existing initiatives, such as mass retrofit schemes, community-owned renewable energy production, projects to reverse biodiversity loss and ensure food security, we can make huge strides towards tackling social injustices such as unemployment and environmental threats such as air pollution and carbon emissions. We are trying to enforce these changes, but at the end of the day, money and regulations speak louder than words. When I imagine myself in 2030 and how happy I'll be to see all the changes I asked for from the European Commission being implemented, one of the ones I'll be particularly happy about is the regulation about protecting existing structures. Global cement production causes about 8% of the world's carbon emissions, and if we can reduce that number by encouraging more retrofits rather than rebuilds, I think that's an investment worth making. It's hard to talk about air pollution without also mentioning transport. Global connectivity has increased over the last decades, and EU policies such as Schengen have supported this transition. There has, however, not been as much enforcement as one could have hoped for to ensure that the transportation is sustainable. A quick search shows that it takes about 3 hours and 55 minutes for a Eurostar train departing from London to reach Amsterdam. Yet, Heathrow to Schiphol is Europe's second busiest international flight route. In the time of a climate crisis, why is this still the case? Transportation is not only a mean to support free movement. EU cross-trade and cabotage transport represents about 11.5% of the total transportation figures, accounting for a significant share of air pollutants and CO2 emissions in our cities. In 2030, the transport sector is a prime example of where I hope that the EU will have played a key role, using the COVID disruption to make a shift in subventions and taxations towards more environmentally friendly priorities. Free trade is a fundamental concept in EU policies, but when looking at resilience strategies and recovery plans, it's perhaps worth thinking what we trade and to what extent. So to summarize, citywide climate action can deliver enormous health benefits. A comprehensive program of clean transport, clean buildings, and an industry underpinned by a zero-carbon grid would contribute to meeting the WHO targets for PM 2.5 throughout the EU. In other words, reducing pollutant levels by a third. This would result in 144,000 fewer premature deaths. Additionally, major economic benefits are to be derived from reduced sick leave, reduced healthcare costs, and less damage to crops and material. Figures are slightly different depending on our rate and approach to reductions, but the estimated figures are all in the range of billions. With all this said, my greatest contribution here today is not to tell you what specific actions you need to take in order to achieve a green transition, but to emphasize that the COVID recovery funds must be guided by public health and scientific expertise, address issues of social equity, and improve the resilience of our cities and communities. I thank you for the opportunity to present here today and to do so with two other incredibly talented women. And as happy as I am to see the European Commission's Diversity and Inclusion Charter mentioning a target of 40% women in the management, I also hope that the next draft of the policy will include a target for Black and ethnic minorities. And on that note, I'll hand over to Moa to talk a bit more about how the EU can work to ensure fairness within their strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Fantastic. Lots of incredibly good suggestions and hints. And I will pass on to Moa for the last presentation. Please, Moa. Seeing Lee in the picture.
So, can you see my presentation?
We can see your present. Yes, now. Perfect. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Moa Johansson. I'm 22 years old and from Ängelholm in southern Sweden. 3 years ago, I moved to Luleå to study political science, and today I work with education policy at the Student Union and on Containing Greens, which is a startup company within the area of innovative cultivation methods. I also have a background in the peace organization CISV. Now over to my vision of the EU climate policy 2030 and how I think the society have to change in order to make the green transition socially fair. My two main focus areas today will be the fairness aspect of lowering the GHG emissions and how to involve the citizens of the European Union. I grew up on a farm with cows, pigs, sheep, and horses, but I still lived quite close to the city. One of the most noticeable difficulties living on the countryside was the dependency on good transportation. Going to school, work, or only to get groceries, you need a car. Public transportation does not run regular on the countryside, and you often need transportation to the bus station. According to the EU Climate Action and Green Deal, one of the aims is to raise the greenhouse gas emission reduction. One of the sectors in focus is transportation, which contributes to around 70% of the GHG emissions. The EU Climate Action says, cities and local authorities will play a crucial role in delivering this strategy. They are already implementing initiatives for low-emission alternatives, energies, and vehicles, encouraging active travel, cycling and walking, public transport and bicycle, and car-sharing pooling schemes to reduce congestion and pollution. On the countryside, cycling and walking is not an alternative. Public transportation are difficult, so how will the European Union implement increased reductions without the rural citizens becoming the big losers? Another quote from the European Commission. Half of Europe is predominantly rural area where about 20% of the population lives. Most of the rural areas are also among the least favored regions in the EU, with a per capita GHP that is significantly lower than European average. With this said, we cannot implement walking and cycling in the rural areas to cut their emissions from transport. Alternative transportation, such as electric cars, might be a better alternative, but the ones on the road today only drives about 300 kilometers in one charge, and that's in 20 plus degrees. Up in Luleå, where I live, the temperature can drop to -10 or even -30 in the winter. Here, electric cars is not a good option. Fossil fuel is very expensive today due to obvious reasons, but to raise taxes further to reduce the initiatives might not be the way to go. The method disadvantages large sections of the European population living in the rural and least favored areas of the region. So this is where my vision of how the European Union will work in 2030 begins. In 2030, the EU have stopped comparing cities and rural areas, rich and poor states, and instead focuses on regions. The urban areas can be challenged. For instance, where public transportation exists, you can prohibit cars powered by fossil fuel. In the rural area, the population needs support to be able to continue with agriculture, food production, and other important activities the rest of us is completely dependent on. Support to make the transition from fossil fuel-driven cars, but also agricultural machinery, which contributes to heavy parts of the GHG emissions. How can the rural area be supported without being forced to move to the cities, which would have meant an even bigger problem as we're dependent on a vibrant countryside? CAP 2030 was a big step back when a greater focus on climate change was expected. Only 20% of the budget is earmarked to the conversion to sustainable agriculture. A change is important for sustainable food production in the future, and it is not you as a consumer who should choose to buy organic food with a low climate impact. It should be standard directly from the producer. This is where the European Union can help, by supporting financially and by developing new technologies. CAP maintains not only food production, but also forest industry and biodiversity. A quote from the European Commission. The loss of biodiversity and the climate crisis are linked. If one of them deteriorates, so does the other. Restoring forests, soil and wetlands, and creating green areas in the cities is necessary to limit climate change to the pace required by 2030. This is important to remember in the broader view on why the rural areas are extremely important in order to restore what we have already destroyed. But I believe that a budget item is not the whole solution. There must be a will to change from the citizens themselves. People tend to accept political decisions, either if it's in their favor or not, if they have been a part of the process. Today, the European Union is far away from the population, and far from everyone knows how the Union works and how decisions are made. National policy may feel more important as it's closer, but that's a naive assumption. Disseminating knowledge about how the EU works allows people on a local level to take part in politics, and giving input that is important and will lead to legitimacy. To summarize my thoughts and my vision, I think we must change the society to a more climate-adapted and sustainable one, and we must do so from the ground and up. By letting food be produced with the help of machines with a low emission or none at all. By letting transports to the grocery stores be without long distances. The farmers and citizens living in the countryside following the development the rest of the world do. Citizen talks, media that highlights the EU agenda, and engage EU citizens on a local level will make people want to change their lives to promote the climate in the future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Moa. Again, lots of really thought-provoking thoughts that we really appreciate. And you have all three been really incredible in keeping time. So that sets an example for you, ambassadors. And I think I have a lot of questions, but I think it's better that I leave the ambassadors to ask questions. We have with us as I said, the ambassador, as you already met, from to Sweden from Germany, Ambassador Prince. And we have also here with us in the studio or in the Europa House, Ambassador Martins from Portugal. And we have on a link Ambassador Skrt from Slovenia. I will ask Ambassador Prince. I will do it in the order that the presidencies are coming. So it's not any other preferential order, but in the order that they're coming. So please, Ambassador Prince. Have you muted? It's okay.
So now I'm unmuted. You can hear me. Very rich presentation. Thanks a lot. What I hear in all three presentations is that you long for a change in values. You know, like there won't be that much growth, and we've had this discussion already in the 70s and 80s, which has led to a lot of models which I can find here in Sweden of a circular economy. Of course, I question this a little bit because you need, of course, growth not only, well, you need certain scale also for environmental technologies. And if you don't produce, how will you have research? So it's very difficult to intertwine this and to decide on the right growth and on the regionalization which you were proposing. It will be interesting to hear from you whether you have any ideas how to do it. You mentioned that the EU is far away from the population, but it's a representational system. So how could one organize it, and how could one organize to get your ideas into the discussion? That's what I'm thinking about right now. I think the others have questions too. That's why I want to stop here.
So you take note, and then I will pass over to you after we have heard all three ambassadors and Christian as well. So, Ambassador Martins.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now I'm muted. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your presentations, but thank you also to the EC representation and to the German presidency for organizing this webinar. I think it shows very well, and it demonstrates that it's right. The survey of a Eurobarometer who said that for Sweden and nationally, the most important issue that the EU is facing is environment and climate action. And it really is a true testament to that, the presentations that you have made. I think also that this discussion on the future of Europe and future of climate action is very well chosen, because we believe that the future of Europe is to discuss policy first. And to answer also that remark about bringing Europe closer to citizens, Portugal believes very much that we do that by bringing the citizens to discussing the policy issues and what really affects their lives. So that is also a very good topic to discuss. On questions and on comments to your presentations, I would choose the topic of fairness in the transition, because that is a topic that is also come to the forefront now with the pandemic. And how do you reinforce resilience, but how do you do it in a fair way and in a social sustained way? And I think that the financial package, the recovery fund that was adopted, will go very much into bringing that fairness. And to do the transition, we have the Just Transition Fund to look at that and to build or bridge the asymmetries between regions. But I would like to ask you what further instruments you think we need to put in place to ensure that we have a fair transition, a fair green transition, that no one is left behind in benefiting also from the opportunities that come from this transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Martins. And then I actually didn't follow the role of presidency as I had said, because now it's Ambassador Skirt who actually comes after the German presidency. So, but please.
Yes, good morning, and thank you, Annika. This is really an interesting discussion, and it probably couldn't be more timely. Let me first thank to the German embassy and the representation of the European Commission for organizing this webinar. I'm sorry I couldn't not join you in Stockholm. I would have to quarantine after returning, so I chose this virtual option. The way I'm participating at the webinar is also an example that sometimes we can skip some travels and contribute to lower emissions. As for the topic of the day, I listened carefully to all presentations and I found them really very interesting. All of Nadja, Liu, and more. And I was thinking during the presentations, how come that we have so many discussions about climate change these recent days? And of course, there is a lot going on in Brussels, and even experts can't really follow all the developments. But I think that also the pandemic a bit accelerated the debate and the policy discussion on urgently needed steps in fight against the climate change. So just to reflect a bit, I agree with Nadja, who said that we can't think about 2030 if we don't think about what is going on right now. And over the weekend, I read the latest EEA, so the European Environment Agency reports, and one could not be very optimistic looking at the figures. They show that when we talk about climate change, that we are not 5 minutes to 12, but rather 5 minutes after 12. And I borrowed this from the director of EEA, Brunix, who always mentioned this to the member states when he tries to persuade them they have to do more. And just one more minute about the report, which says that the temperatures in Europe will continue to rise for decades, even for 50 to 60 years, even if we act now. So the adaptation to heat waves in summer and more precipitation in winter will be definitely needed. And we humans, I think, we are good in adapting. And if we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, we adopted to new measures, I think, very, very quickly. And climate change is something very similar, only happening maybe 50, 60 times slower. And this is why it can be even more dangerous and misleading. And I'm sure you know the fable about the boiling frog. So I agree with all three presenters that we need to act now, and that there are a lot of things that have to be done. I would just go to maybe a question to all three presenters. So you all mentioned what needs to be done and that we have to act now. And you will be at the peak of your career in 10 years. So what do you think will be the challenges in 2030? Do you think we will achieve the target of reducing the emissions by, let's say, at least 55%? Have we done enough? Thank you, and over to you, Annika.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Skirt. I would like to pass to Christian, if you want to ask some questions to our students.
To unmute. Do you hear me now? Good. Well, thanks a lot. Thank you, Nadja. Thank you, Liv, and thank you, Moa. Very thought-provoking, well thought out presentations, and also with a number of I would say very ambitious suggestions. So my questions to you are, Nadja, you put very ambitious targets, which I think seems to be the right ones if one would like to reach what has been agreed in Paris. When you look on it, what would you say are the major issues that is going to make this problematic? And how would you say that one should mitigate against it? And when it comes to leave, I think this bringing in the broader picture, namely.
Could you just repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah, what would you think one should do to mitigate those challenges? How should we address them? And Liv, when it comes to the broader picture, you brought in the environment in the broader sense, and not only the climate change element, but also air pollution element. When you look on it, are you optimistic? Is it a link here between the fact that we are addressing climate change with the cut of 55% has been set up as an objective? Will that automatically lead also to a reduction in air pollution? And when it comes to Moa, I think what you brought up is something which is not brought up. I come from the countryside originally, so we are in the same game. And I think there is something about policy being very much focused on towns. And I think what you said about the importance of thinking of how can we keep people living in the countryside. And you pointed to the problems of transport, but also other element of services in the countryside. Have you thought about what this means? Would you argue, for instance, be more of collective transport, focusing on the rural areas? Should we try to have more of services in the rural areas that are there right there now, not there right now? And finally, to all of you, do you want to see more Europe on this? Or do you think this is something that should be handled by the member states by themselves? I stop here.
I think you got a handful of questions. Some questions were directed to each one of you, and some questions more collectively. So I let you also choose what questions you would like to answer to. And maybe I start with you, Liv.
All right, thank you very much. These are really good and interesting questions. So I think I'm going to start to address the Slovenian ambassador's question of why there have been so many discussions in recent days and what will be the challenge of 2030. So I think we are not only in a climate crisis, but also in a biodiversity crisis. And the current rate of mass extinction that is happening is leading to changes that cannot be reversed. So therefore, we can't wait and address this in a couple of years from now. These extinctions are happening now and needs to be addressed directly. And also to address the Swedish ambassador's question of, am I optimistic? And I suppose it depends on if we start addressing these changes now. We know what has to be done to improve climate resilience, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as air pollution. The problem is that we haven't been doing it, and we haven't been doing it to the extent that we need to. In my presentation, I did mention that green investments are not only beneficial for our health, but also for economic stimulation, as the German ambassador was touching upon. And there can be economic growth with a green transition. So I definitely think there are many things in favor for doing this transition. And we have a massive opportunity now with the investment funds that have been invested to the COVID recovery. And I know there is a target of 30% of these funds targeting specifically environmentally friendly solutions, but I simply don't think it's enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moa, you had some interesting color changes behind you there, but now we see you again brightly. So please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to address the last question about how we should keep the people in the rural areas and why. We need to stop the urbanization. While people start to move to the cities, just get the bigger agricultural problems. Climate changes affects the rural areas the most with bad harvests, and that affects the people living in the cities. And when you go to the grocery store, you buy the products that are made out on the countryside. And to do that, we need to stop putting the schools in the cities. We can have schools on the countryside as well. And we don't have to have the bigger places. We can have small schools, we can have small shops. I think we can't continue with the pace we're having right now with small places closing down.
Okay, thank you, Moa. I think, Nadja, there were quite some questions to you about our economic models and the growth. So maybe you would like to respond to some of those. Please, Nadja.
Yes, thank you. So concerning, as also Ambassador Prince mentioned, the value change. And I think this is quite crucial that we kind of see that the kind of decoupling that we would need, the absolute decoupling between greenhouse gas emissions and our economic growth, is not possible at the rate that we would need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So that's why I would propose that we don't focus, because now we always use that as a measure on if our societies are progressing. We use growth as a way of seeing if society is well and healthy. But I mean, that indicator just doesn't reflect if people have food, if people are healthy, if people are happy, if people live a good life. So I think that's why it would be important to kind of have another indicator for that. And I mean, New Zealand has started with that. In Bhutan, we have a happiness index. I mean, they're like this human progress index. There are so many things which could be used and that are already there. And I mean, there are a lot of scientific evidence on that this rate of absolute decoupling hasn't happened so far. The decoupling that we've seen has been because industries have been outsourced into other areas. So I think that's why it's and for example, that's why the donut economic model could be a way to rethink that and to really rethink on what policies are in line with the planetary boundaries, but also help to have a good life and a strong societal basis. And I mean, that doesn't mean that some technologies can grow and some jobs can grow and education can grow, etc. But I think this focus needs to go back from growth. And there was also a question about further instruments. And I think, as also Liv mentioned, it's like so crucial to do things now. And looking at the things that are invested, the money that is invested now, is just such huge amounts. So I think that we really need to put all our effort in this. So I don't think, I think it shouldn't be possible that a third of the EU budget, like the common agriculture policy, prohibits member states to be more active on agroecology, or like puts forward industrial agriculture and kind of puts us in a path on that. And also within the recovery fund, there's still gas infrastructure that will be funded with that, which is not a transition fuel. There needs to be a ban on fossil fuel. There needs to at least 40% of climate earmarking within that. So I think we could just do a lot more there. And I see if there's another question. And I think what was also, with the ambitious target. Well, I think what we need to realize is that the climate doesn't make any political compromises. So even if we would think that, for example, a 55% target has a good political compromise between the EU countries, that's not enough to reach a 1.5 degree target. And we have then irreversible effects, and the costs would be so much higher than the investments that we would need to take now. So that's why I think there just has to be a political will to reach at least the minus 65 degrees targets. And I think there it's really about that every member state tries to convince the other member states that this is the right way to go. And I mean, yeah, it could happen through strengthening the Just Transition Fund, which unfortunately was decreased in the last EU meeting, where countries that are kind of have less possibilities or more dependent on fossil fuels are really supported in this transition. But I also think, so there might be, of course, some issues between member states, but I think through, maybe Just Transition approach that can be helped. And I definitely think there needs to be more Europe on these questions. I don't think that, I mean, it's a global crisis, and I think the more we work together, the more important. And but also Europe, as also Mua said, it needs to come closer to citizens. So through citizen dialogues, through experiments like citizen assemblies, or through young youth delegates bringing their propositions, and kind of institutionalizing more participatory processes within the EU. And it could also be by making consultations more accessible to people, less technical, for example.
I think you wanted to come back there, Ambassador Prince?
Yes, because we have 8 more minutes left, and we wanted to include also questions from Facebook and from others. As I mentioned earlier, this chance we have now to introduce you in a dialogue which is coming is of course great, and we have to think about how we do it. So the French ambassador, he mentioned that we will have now the 2-year process of the conference on the future of Europe, stretching to the French, Swedish, Czech trio presidency. So the idea would be now, how do we get it in? You mentioned institutionalization, the dialogue, participation of the process. But what would be to your liking how to do it? Should we, for example, is there a special Swedish way to do it? Should we have a dialogue with universities? Which are the institutions maybe we can include to be more structured? And then how do we get the message across to Europe? Or how would you wish this to be happening?
Please feel free to jump in.
I can start responding to this question. I think it's great that you're talking about having more inclusion in this conversation, and I think it's a really important question. And as I'm currently based in London, I can draw an example from there. There was an article 1 or 2 years ago mentioning that 27% of people in London lives in poverty. And I know London is perhaps a sensible topic, seeing how the EU strategy is changing, but I think we can see similar trends in other cities across Europe. And in these areas, there are a lot of minority communities, a lot of Black and ethnic minorities, and I don't think there is representation enough of these communities in the EU at the moment. So I would like to see more conversations with people that don't normally access these conversations, and what their hopes and ambitions are for where the EU politics is going.
Moa, would you have some comments? How do we include the rural citizens and inhabitants more in this discussion?
Yeah, as I said in my presentation, the use of media, I think, is a good way to go. Social media is very accessible. Even if you're away from many people, you can be far away and you can still sit in a conversation like this today. So by starting using media in a new way, I think we can make people talk about politics in a better way, to talk about the climate and to inform more and to let them discuss it. I think discussion is the way to go.
Perfect. Thank you. Nadja?
I think drawing from the event that we organized with Per Sweden, I think there are a lot of things happening, and also especially young people are organizing. As I also mentioned, this report on from Generation Climate Europe, which were pooling opinions and ideas from a lot of hundreds European young people. But I think the point is that we can have a lot of dialogues, etc. But I think people also want to see that those are really taken that they're really taken in those proposals, and that they're really discussed then at the political level. And so I mean, I think it's a good way to kind of have the participation processes quite decentralized, but then kind of bringing them together, having maybe those results from could be youth organization-wide, it could be university-wide consultations, to have them actually discussed by the politicians, and then also politicians saying what they are going to do with these results. I think that's also really crucial.
Thank you very much. We have a few more minutes. Don't have any question from Facebook. I know we have one there as well. Or we can take that one first. And while Ambassador Prince is saying that, the rest of you, Ambassador and Christian, we're going to check if they have listened. So I would like you to end with just a sentence, what you take with you from the presentations by Liv, Moa and Nadja when we leave here in a few minutes. But first we had a little greeting, I think, or a little comment from a listener.
Yes, because the question, for example, if you have a dialogue regionally, maybe a rural one, maybe one in Sweden, maybe at universities. There is also a suggestion by the new Director General of the Secretariat of the Council of the Baltic Sea States, Grzegorz Pozniański, here in Stockholm. And they are organizing a Baltic Sea regional vision on climate issue conferences. So he offers also to support. And I think then we have to see how your ideas are handed over to the conference. I remember we did this when we had the conference on the Constitution of Europe in a similar setting. So we organized, for example, according to the discussions which went on in Brussels, dialogues with the universities, and we then fed in the conclusions of the universities to our representation in Brussels. There are ways to do it, but maybe in these days there are new ways, and you can offer us more solutions.
Thank you. So then I will start with Ambassador Skirt. What do you bring with you from this session?
Yes, thank you very much again for the floor. I'm rather optimistic after this session. I think that when we talk about transition to green economy or greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, there's still some questions that need to be addressed. Not whether, but how to achieve the objective, especially how to distribute the burden fairly, and how to leave no one behind, and how to prove solidarity again among member states. But listen to all the presenters. I think that it is very clear that they are aware, and I think also politicians are aware, that we have to act now to adapt to higher temperatures and to different weathers in winters and in summers. And I'm sure that we will get there. The only thing that concerns me is what it will be after 2030, because I think it will be even more challenging than from now to 2030, that the burden on the presenters and future generations will be even higher there. But let me say that I'm very optimistic in this regard, that we are going all in the right direction, and that there are no big differences, particularly not among member states. And the European Union has to lead by example also the rest of the world, and I think we will succeed.
Thank you, Ambassador Skirt. Then Ambassador Martins.
Thank you. Well, I think the main message is it is time for action and time for more ambition. I would just like to point out that we are talking about minimum targets, and as one of you said, there's nothing stopping the EU member states and the EU as a whole to go further. And I think we are also have to be aware that we have the Green Deal as the growth strategy for the European Union. So we are committed to really put the green transition in the forefront of all our efforts, and it's very well mainstreamed now already for national member states and at European level. So I would tend to agree with the Slovenian ambassador that we should be optimistic. I think this very unprecedented financial package that we have now will give us a chance to really act as you are requiring from us. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Prince, what do you take with you?
I can just agree at this point with my colleagues, and I'm happy because right now I think we are getting a compromise in Brussels. There will be money, there will be new technologies, and in Europe we can choose the best to give them scale in Europe and also to change our economy to the better. We have this mindset now among the young people, but we constantly also have to remind us of it and work on it because we have to adjust. So I'm optimistic also seeing you and hoping that we can spread the word also to others in your community and not only in Sweden, all over Europe. The dialogue with the young people is most important because it's you who will decide on the future.
Thank you. Christian, what do you take with you?
Oh, thanks a lot. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. Great discussion. What I take with me is there's a need for ambition. I take with me that there are objectives that are going to come into conflict with each other, and one needs to find the right balance. I think we discussed the growth objective and the climate change objective, which is the most obvious one, but also issues relating to the whole issue of air pollution, climate change, environment more generally, and that needs to be looked into. I take with me that there's a need for dialogue, and the dialogue of the kind that we have had today. I think this experiment, which was the first time for us, is something that we're going to repeat. The way that you have presented it, given the sort of line for the discussion, has been extremely useful, I think, for us all in our discussion. And I take with me also that a certain optimism. Optimism at the European level. I take it that what you pointed to is that we need more Europe. And if we look on Europe today, it is, as was underlined by several of the speakers, there is a broad recognition of the need for the Green Deal, and see that also coming into play. And that is something which I believe we should be optimistic about. And I take with me the suggestion that we need to keep a very close eye on the policies now when they are developing, everything from the recovery package to the implementation of the various policy areas, that we really see to that the Green Deal continues to be a leading objective for it in the future.
Thank you. Then we are a few minutes over time, so I will just end by thanking the ambassadors and Christian, but above all, thanking you, Liv, Moa and Nadja, that you took your time to really think through this vision and really make outstandingly good presentations. I know that you also have another life, studies and work, etc., but you really took your time, which we very, very much appreciate. And we will also take note, and as we said, this will be fed into the process, and we hope to keep this dialogue going. And so don't give up on us. We want to be there and we want to have this dialogue. So thank you very much, and thank you to all who have watched on Facebook, and thank you and goodbye for this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.